So take a look at this. This is some incredible art, and even though I love the look of it, what I love even more is the pencil work that's underneath. When I was starting out, I had so many questions that kept me guessing, and I never really found out how a professional comic book artist goes from a blank page to penciling a masterpiece. Well, in this video, I'm going to give you guys what I never had. I'm going to explain what penciling really means, talk about some tools that are used to produce the best results, and guide you through the whole process. Well, let me remind you, we are already midway through the comic art drawing process. Head to part 1 of this video series to learn everything you've missed thus far and ensure you're not handicapped when you finally start penciling. And be sure to stick around till the end because I give 3 insights that I wish I was taught when I was a beginner. Take a look at these. They are all examples of comic book penciling. This is where you stop me and say, how can that be true when they all have a completely different level of detail, line quality, and polish? How are they the same thing? To answer that, let's first define what comic penciling is. Penciling is a weird sounding verb that you might have not heard before. Penciling refers to the process of using a pencil to draw comic art so it can later be inked on top of and probably colored. So comic book penciling doesn't really describe the look or level of detail or anything like that. It only means a step in the process of creating, and that will mean different things depending on how an artist works. Check out this diagram of comic art and see where you might fit. Comic pencils, which is just a short name for penciled artwork, in the simplest level, it can be as rough as a thumbnail. And more experienced artists will use their penciled work in this way because 1, they're working alone, and 2, they like to do more of the thinking and the labor part of the penciling in the inking stage. An example here would be somebody like Ethan Van Sciver or Jorge Jimenez if you're talking about digital art. Pencils can also be a loose drawing, maybe tighter than a thumbnail, but not really close to a look that you would call final. However, it is very useful if you're trying to save time and don't have a ton of cojones to go blindly into the inking stage. This level of pencils has Daniel Warren Johnson and guys like that written all over it. And here we arrive at the middle ground, where we find the majority of artists and collaborators. That's because their pencils end up looking like a page that's moderately polished and from a certain perspective already looks like a finished piece of art. This type of pencil work is found in just about everywhere. They're your Jim Lee, Scott Williams teams, or your Capullo, Galapian team-ups. Then there's a slightly more clean version of this. This type is very detailed and polished, but will still head to an inker for finishes and cleanup. Something like Philip Tan's pencils may be a good example of this. Lastly, there's a pencil page that's not really intended to be inked, and instead goes straight to color. It is usually very crisp, and it's not really perfectly clean, but has a great vibe. These specific cases bring to mind Joe Madureira, and what your penciled work will look like just depends on if you want to ink it yourself, have someone else ink it, or be so clean that it doesn't need ink at all. So this last category of the super clean pencil work that maybe goes straight to color is the one I've been obsessed with for over a decade. To accomplish a clean penciled look, I like to use a variety of pencils and erasers, and some more things as well. Using pencils of the same grade and hardness of any brand will work here. I also will have some links. They are affiliated links, so they will give me a kickback to the channel if you want to support, but don't feel like you're obligated. So here's a diagram of pencils graded on a hardness scale, just for your reference. Harder pencils like, say, in the H range will smudge way less, but will also trade the ability to shade as dark. So keep that in mind. Okay, let's run through these pretty quick. First, I use a 6H for transferring my layouts. Second, I use a 2H wood pencil, which is my workhorse, and in today's example, I use a Venus brand. This Venus brand I don't even think you can find anymore, it's kind of like an antique, but I really enjoyed using it. However, I usually use a Mitsubishi Hayuni 2H. It's something I picked up from watching Greg Capullo's interviews, and he was right when he said it was buttery smooth. I also use an HB mechanical pencil for finishes. Right now I'm using a 0.5 Sakura Sumo grip, which I actually love, and I'm not sure why I don't use more. For erasers, I'm pretty basic. I use a bulky plastic Staedtler Mars eraser and a basic pencil eraser stick. Both of these erasers are important because you'll be able to get the big stuff and the small stuff. There are some other tools like my Westcott gridded see-through 18-inch ruler, or a generic pencil sharpener, or a kneaded eraser. and sometimes I like to use sandpaper for precise sharpening. So let's begin the actual bliss that is comic penciling. This part is what I love most about when it comes to drawing comic book art, because it's the time when all your previous drawings and all your patience and all your research pays off. So if we think of this whole journey like a trek up a mountain, the first leg of this trek is the lightboxing phase. In this stage, you're going to transfer all your previously made layouts onto a clean new canvas. Yes, you could eyeball this like before, but I recommend taking a picture of your layouts and printing it to a scale that's to the correct size of whatever paper size your art should be. In American comics, we like to do this on 11x17 paper traditionally. If you have to eyeball it, that's unfortunate because you may lose some of those valuable sketch lines used in your layout. Lightboxing is when you use a surface that emits light to lay your artwork on and then overlay a new sheet of paper on top to transfer your work. I'm using a US Supply light pad, but you can use anything really. So here are your easiest options for lightboxing if you can't afford one. Easiest one is a window. It's the simplest and easiest because you can probably find a window anywhere. Next is a tablet like an iPad. There are actually apps out there that are probably free to max out your brightness and use an iPad screen to be this light emitting service. To Lightbox, I take my layouts behind my new sheet of artboard or paper, whatever you have going on. Now, you could use clips, they do have those, but masking tape works just fine. Now, if you're not using a blue-lined artboard, you may want to start by establishing a bleed around the page. This bleed is just a fancy word that describes where you would cut the page if you were to reproduce by copying or printing so that the art would go all the way to the edge. Now we just transfer the most important lines from the layouts carefully, but with as much energy as possible. The trick here is to find a nice speed where you're not perfectly trying to replicate the line where you're now wobbling as you're going too slow, but you're also not missing the mark completely. Lastly, I like to use a blue lead pencil to throw perspective grid lines. I know I'm not getting into fundamentals here. If you don't know what perspective is, this is a huge area of study that I may cover in the future, but I really like David Chelsea's Perspective for Comic Book Artists book. The blue line can be easily pulled out of your work digitally, so that's why I go with that color. So welcome to the main pass. If we're really on a mountain, this would be the bulk of the trek. Before I get going with the process, notice that my layout art here is different than what I had in part 1. Since the Battlebook Road headshots won't give me a chance to fully demonstrate what really goes into penciling with all the background elements and all the complex composition, I decided to switch it up to this Goats Rider character here. He's a parody character that a friend commissioned me to draw, which is pretty great, but the only thing you need to know here is that I did all the steps from part 1, like thinking through the ideas, finding reference, and going through the sketching phase. It's all there. As I said in part 1, this is not a how to draw video. I'll not be going over any of the details with posing figures, anatomy, composition, blah blah blah, any of the other fundamentals. However, here are a few standout art videos that I like that can be helpful companions to my video series here. Even a guy like me who has spent a long time drawing still has to remind myself that there's a process here and I probably shouldn't get overwhelmed. If you stick to the plan, it's going to be okay. So here's my approach to drawing pencils. It's one that you can follow and it's a decent way to start. First, grab your best friend. No, not your real best friend. Your comrade in arms, the 2H pencil, or whatever your workhorse pencil is. Start by strengthening the lines that you have already transferred from your layouts. What I mean by strengthening is 1, bolding the lines that look spot on from your transfer. You can look at some of the transfer lines that are maybe a little bit off and support those lines with parallel lines next to them. Or if you have lines that are totally wrong from your transfer, you can go ahead and try to fix those. For the time being, only work on non-focal point areas of your page. Start with background objects or things around the margin of your page. This is where I start adding lighting. This is where it all happens. When you add lighting, this is when our human nature kicks in and the illusion of depth starts to work. So this may come in different flavors depending on your style that you're going for, but every comic artist indicates light in some way. Guys like Alvin Lee keep it pretty ambiguous, but even he adds heavier lines in certain places to indicate where the light is coming from. So here's exactly how to do that. Hopefully you've already picked the location for your light source in previous stages, maybe in your thumbnail and your layouts. But if not, decide on where you want your light to be coming from. I'm assuming you're a beginner, so let's just keep this simple and keep it to one light source. That way, no matter what, all your shadows will be going in one direction. Now pick an object within your scene that has been strengthened a bit with your 2H line already. You're going to do one of two things here. You're going to use that same 2H and either draw an even thicker line on the sides of the object opposite of your light, or you're going to decide this whole area of the object should be dark and place a outline around a plotted area where you're going to shade it in. This area gets filled in with graphite and most likely ink later. You'll notice at some point that you're drawing lines and they're actually going where you want them to go without much hassle or erasing. This is how you know you're warmed up and you're ready to tackle the main focus of the page. More than likely, the focus will be the 3 most interesting things on the page. Now, this is a generality, but you guys are beginners, so I want to keep it pretty general. So do the same strengthening and lighting steps we did for the other things, but on your focal points. Spend a good amount of time getting your focal points looking crisp and attractive. The focal points on the page are your bread and butter for the viewer. And now, finally, we get to the main attractions for comic book art and penciling in general, and that is rendering. I suggest you find your favorite artist and start emulating their look. They'll probably be using cross-hatching, hatching, or some variation of texturing to help their lighting situation. But the basic idea for rendering is to suggest that the light source is there even more by adding hatch lines, aka just pencil marks, going from your shadows and working toward the light. They should gradually be less and less hard and apparent the closer it gets to the light. And this will imply a more realistic lighting situation. So work in this rendering detail wherever you'd like. This whole process is a blast. I love it, and I think you'll love it too once you get into the flow of things. Whenever you get stuck trying to draw something that's really hard, like we did with the layouts, all you have to do is open up your reference and realign yourself a bit. Start copying from the reference a little bit, and that's okay in short spurts, as long as you return to the free flow style eventually. But using reference is key for learning, and you should do it. At some point, you'll look at the page and think, man, I think this is done. And that's probably a time to take a break and come back with fresh eyes. Here are 3 things I wish I was told when I first started drawing comic art. The first is keeping your pencil sharp during the comic book penciling climb, because it's a long way. And over time, your pencil's going to dull out. So always keep your pencil sharp and it'll do wonders for your line work. And here's why. When you have a pencil that's sharp, it subtly nudges you toward a more refined end result. Now, will having a sharp pencil suddenly make your inexperienced line making informed and beautiful? No, it will only remind you that subconsciously every stroke matters and you should care. Number 2, watch out for dead space. I love that game, but no, I mean dead space detail. Ever wonder why stores that are not fully stocked and have some empty shelves here and there just feel wrong? Well, it's because our eyes and brain automatically take note and tally up how everything is laid out. When there is a break or a change in an interval of sameness, something triggers within ourselves and we start to pay attention. So in your artwork, be on the lookout for completely blank spaces, or what I like to call dead space. If that dead space is not intentional or somewhere near your focal point, put a couple of hatch marks there randomly, or put a little bit of texture there, and this will keep your viewer's eyes flowing pleasantly across your image and not just some random floorboard in your image. And third, be aware of your energy levels, but more accurately, your willpower levels. When you try something that you're not used to doing and you put a ton of expectations on the results, it's going to eat up a lot of energy and willpower, and at insane speeds. This is why I wish I was told early on to split up my art making into different sessions. There's no need to rush through this. When it seems like you're over it, when you notice yourself getting lazy with your art, with some lines, it's okay to stop and come back. In fact, it's not only okay, it's what's required to do your best. This is when you take a reflection period and look at your work for a minute. You'll undoubtedly see that there are some things on the page you originally liked, but now you don't. Here's where you fix those mistakes, add details where you think they could help, and double check if you followed the fundamentals accurately to your best knowledge. This is also a good time to look back on part 1's prompts that we went over and see if you met all of the things that you intended to do originally. It's okay if they didn't go exactly to plan, but the more that you strive to draw something specific, the more you're going to learn in the process. This step may be simply acknowledging that you've done your best and just noticing what you can. So here are a few things that you can do for your comic art that may improve. This is kind of subjective, is what I'm trying to say. Number 1 is to throw a darker contour around the important characters and shapes of major objects, like this. Then, using the same HB pencil, I also make a few rendering marks around the core shadow lines. I know this is not a fundamentals course, but adding a darker line here will add a fundamental part of lighting into the mix. Now let's do our best to erase any stray lines that have gone unnoticed or unwanted. Clean up the margins, all of that. No worries if you miss some here because there is another opportunity coming up. The last thing is to find a place to sign your name. I like to include a small date so I can easily mark and remember what year I did every piece. And now you're done. Thanks for joining me for part 2. I hope this video shed light on my favorite part of comic book art. Be sure to subscribe to see the final video in the series where I cap this whole process off by walking you through the basics of prepping your finished lines and coloring your art digitally. If you're interested in getting quick and easy art tips that you can read in just a couple minutes every week, delivered to your email, sign up for Good Art Tips. Join the crew, it's getting bigger by the day, and you can get a little bit more inspiration to take your art even further. Follow me on X. See you next time. Be good, everybody.